It appears that Michigan is again ready for normal activity and that violence has been contained for now. Without the personal efforts of thousands of firefighting, law enforcement, and military personnel, doctors, nurses, and communications media, Michigan would be in far sadder shape than it is. Sadly, the price of public service has been heavy for some families. We all profoundly regret the loss. My purpose in reporting to the people of Michigan is fourfold. One, to try to avoid an even greater tragedy and to make Detroit and our entire state a place where every citizen has equal opportunity. Two, to try to prevent a backlash that it could only result in a third explosion in Detroit, even more devastating than those in 1943 and 1967. Three, to help defeat the efforts of some members of each race to build two separate societies in America. Four, to pledge strengthened law enforcement and firm maintenance of law and order. Now, what happened in Detroit could start in most big cities. Unless we take the proper course, this nation in the years ahead could be plunged into civil guerrilla warfare. In the days and months ahead, questions will be raised and debate will rage over what actions the country should take. Some already are saying the answer is brute force, such as would be used on mad dogs. Others are questioning present social and economic programs because they claim the Negroes don't appreciate what has already been done. Instead of doing more to eliminate social and racial injustice, these critics would do less. Some white people and public officials advocate the return to states' rights. White extremist organizations are preaching hate and arming. More and more Negroes are listening to and supporting Negro leaders who advocate a separate black society in America. These militant revolutionists are preaching hate, violence, and rebellion. Furthermore, they are organizing on a national basis and they are arming for that purpose. We should not ignore these grave facts. We must unhesitatingly reject all these divisive courses. A nation is no stronger without than it is within. The fate of our nation, yes, the fate of a free world, could be determined by the choices we make and the actions we take. The riot in Detroit was not caused just by events and circumstances in Detroit. It was caused more by national conditions than Detroit conditions, although we could and should have done much more on our own to prevent it. None of us can afford to be indifferent to what happened, why it happened, and what we must do to keep it from happening again. Exactly what was the Detroit riot? It was integrated looting, with whites and Negroes both taking part, sometimes side by side. And the looting was conducted by a small minority of the populations of both races. It was an attack on property, policemen, and firefighters. The targets of firebombers appeared to be selective for the purpose of hitting white-owned property. The riot produced an integrated effort to restore law and order, with Negro and white both working for peace, again side by side. There were few instances of Negroes out to mob whites or vice versa. This was the biggest difference between the 1943 riot and the 1967 riot. When order was finally restored to Detroit, it was through sufficient force. Until our force was strong enough, disorder reigned. But the question that begs for an answer is this: why did it happen? There's no single response, but in my judgment, these are among the reasons. Because too many do not really believe and practice the belief that each American is endowed by his Creator with the same inalienable rights and must have equal opportunity for self-development and participation in a truly open society. Because of a decline in religious faith and moral character that leads to a rising pattern of permissiveness, corruption, and crime. because we have failed to recognize the urgency of eliminating social injustice and racial discrimination, because we have failed to adequately support responsible Negro leadership, because the movement of Negroes to northern urban areas has created great concentrations of unskilled and uneducated people living in unbelievable poverty and human indignity, surrounded by the world's first generally affluent society, because well-intentioned urban renewal programs displaced ghetto Negroes from their homes in other sections of the city and produced even greater overcrowding in the already incendiary 12th Street area, because too many Negroes have become super-sensitive to race, even to the point of defending those guilty of violating the law and even advocating violence and revolution, because the response to nonviolent demonstration and peaceful petition has been superficial and politically self-serving, because too many people have thought they could escape the problems of the ghetto by moving to the suburbs, because we have undermined self-reliance and weakened personal initiative, because our welfare rolls have rewarded illegitimacy and penalized family life, because we have in too many ways substituted government, money, and professionals for our personal responsibilities as neighbors and brothers, because most white people do not really know any Negroes, and because Negroes do not really know any white people, because in places like 12th Street, Detroit children see the most prosperous adults violate the law with impunity, because of long-standing friction between the Negroes and a predominantly white police force, because of low police pay and low teacher salaries, because poverty is being made worse by inflation, because the greatest economic progress in America is now being made by those who have organized the greatest amount of private power. This, then, is a catalog of some deficiencies in our society and our personal attitudes and endeavors that have built up the situation which resulted in the havoc of the Detroit riot. Now, how do we stop lawlessness and violence that can lead to riots? Well, we can enforce the law without fear or favor, and apply the force necessary to maintain law and order, and use weapons to the extent necessary. But the use of force must never be brutal or unreasonable, and it must be adequate and consistent with the crime. This has been my standing order to state personnel at all times. Criminal acts cannot be ignored or go unpunished. Now, these above policies worked in Highland Park, Hamtramck, Pontiac, Saginaw, and Grand Rapids. They will be used to prevent disturbances from becoming riots whenever state police or National Guard assistance is required. In the case of Detroit, my on-the-scene appraisal resulted in the decision to ask for federal troops a little before 3 a.m. on Monday, July 24th. This early effort to secure federal assistance was to make certain we could apply adequate force to bring the rioting under control as quickly as possible. And I was assured at that time by the Attorney General of the United States that my oral request was adequate. That request was never withdrawn, nor did I ever cease pressing for the earliest possible use of federal troops on the streets. Now, as Governor of Michigan, I have not hesitated to take the steps necessary to maintain law and order, and I will not hesitate in the future. Now, what must be done to avoid a repetition of the Detroit rioting or to keep something even worse from happening? Well, first, we must be willing to involve ourselves personally in helping to solve the problems of our communities and our brothers. We must not expect government or the other fellow to do it all. Second, we must create genuine equality of opportunity in education, in employment, and in housing. In education, we must work with preschool programs, with community schools. We must develop summer educational programs or summer job programs for our school-age streets youth who must be kept off of the streets in the summertime. We must emphasize adult education, work toward a metropolitan school system where every youngster in the metropolitan area will have equal educational opportunity and equal financial support for his schooling. In employment, emphasize study work vocational training, replace hiring tokenism with employer implant training and hiring Negroes across the board. We must have genuine merit promotion and remove union apprenticeship and other restrictions to equality of job opportunity. In housing, we must have open housing on a statewide basis. Zoning that creates either large-scale economic or racial segregation should be eliminated. We must provide low-cost private housing through nonprofit organizations in all parts of the metropolitan area and throughout the state. We must compel real estate agents to show all listed properties, report all offers, and abstain from any effort based on race or religion to influence the property owner in the listing and sale of property. Third, provide adequate funds for the State Civil Rights Commission. Fourth, stimulate local rights ordinances and race relations commissions. Fifth, encourage private initiative and more responsibility in eliminating social injustice in all fields involving all races. Sixth, accelerate metropolitan regional planning and services without eliminating needed decentralization of city and neighborhood organizations. We could not have saved Detroit from fire without the cooperation of fire departments throughout the metropolitan area and throughout most of the southeastern part of the state. Seventh, secure a just application of the economic principle of reward related to contribution so as to permanently improve teacher and police compensation. Eighth, provide improved training for the police and National Guard. Ninth, federal encouragement of state, local, and private action through cooperation with and reliance on the states, except in those instances where state policies do not measure up to basic national standards. Now, in our free society, where we can use our rights as citizens to change that which needs to be changed, there is no justification for any violation of the law. If each individual is free to decide which laws he considers moral and which ones he will obey, we are on the sure road to lawlessness, riots, and anarchy. The social and economic injustice that exists cannot be corrected in this way. It can only be corrected through law and obedience to law, both God-given and man-made. Violation of law to secure needed social and economic improvement cannot be countenanced. No American has the right to break the law. Now, I know that all but a small number of white and Negro citizens recognize by now that criminal conduct must be curbed and punished quickly, whether it is committed by black or white, that enforcing the law is not a discrimination against race. I appeal to every citizen to increase respect for law by every word and deed. You know, American success and abundance have produced a generation of Americans, too many of whom have been allowed to grow up by doing as they please, without sound discipline in their homes, churches, schools, or amusements. Too many have not known the meaning, nor do they understand the essentiality and value of authority. Young people want and need to have rules and have them enforced. They lack respect for parents, clergy, and teachers who let them do as they please. Permissiveness, laxity, and rationalizing away the validity of proven principles of human decency and moral responsibility are eroding the foundations of American life on every hand. Now, each of us must accept a personal responsibility to fill this void and rebuild respect for law and authority. Considering all of these conditions, I have faith the people of Michigan will support necessary action. I believe you will recognize that the principal responsibility to prevent another Holocaust is yours individually and through all of the private institutions of which you are a part. The greatest satisfactions from life come when we inconvenience ourselves to do things for others. The greatest human progress is produced by those who find ways to more fully serve others. The greatest human problems are overcome only when we care enough to help another. Now, time prevents discussion of all the many emergency steps being taken to meet food, clothing, housing, and other needs, as well as the moving, voluntary response of citizens and private organizations. Mayor Kavanaugh and I have, with the support of representative community leadership, designated Joseph L. Hudson, Jr. to head a representative area-wide committee to mobilize action programs needed to rebuild a better Detroit. And Mr. Hudson will be announcing the names of the members of his committee and the telephone numbers and addresses that you can use to help and to offer to help and to send help. Now, in addition, the mayor and I plan to appoint a joint group of top experts to searchingly investigate the causes of the riot, the actions taken to end it, and the programs needed to eliminate state and local conditions that helped trigger it. I believe we can rebuild Detroit and make it a model for the nation in human well-being for all. After all, Detroit and Michigan have provided national and world leadership in many fields. We can do it in race relations and urban improvements. We've made a start, and we must press forward. It'll take persistence and total commitment. Human beings change slowly. There are no shortcuts. The achievement of essential goals will take time. There will be those who will not do their part, but thus must not discourage us or delay us. For the fate of America depends on our success in demonstrating that all that America is for every American to enjoy, and all that America can be is for every American to build. Thank you, and may God help us.